It takes a true leader, and a leader who really loves his or her country, to take such risk and self-confidence to not only discuss but direct his or her country to issues that affects his or her country according to their environment. Hello and welcome to the Age of Politics podcast. Geopolitical Queen here, and today I'm gonna allow you to listen to His Excellency Vladimir Putin's speech at the Valdai meeting, where he asks the great question: who has the right to dictate to anybody how the one should live in his or her country? Let's take a listen.
You know, action gives rise to reaction. This is what any responsible state, a sovereign, independent and self-respecting country does. Everyone is aware that in an international system where arbitrariness reigns, where everything is decided by the one who imagines himself to be exceptional, sinless, and the only one right, anyone can be under attack simply for the reason that this or that country does not like the hegemon, who has lost a sense of proportion and, I would add, a sense of reality. Unfortunately, we have to admit that our counterparties in the West have lost their sense of reality. They have crossed all possible boundaries in vain. The Ukrainian crisis is not a territorial conflict. I want to emphasize this. Russia is the largest country in the world in terms of territory. We have no interests in terms of conquering any additional territories. We still have to develop Siberia, Eastern Siberia, and the Far East. This is not a territorial conflict. This is not even the establishment of a regional geopolitical balance. The question is much broader and more fundamental. We are talking about the principles on which the New World Order will be based. Lasting peace will only be established when everyone begins to feel safe, when everyone understands that their opinions are respected, and that there is a balance in the world. When no one is able to force others to live and behave the way the hegemon pleases, in such a scheme, the very concept of any sovereignty simply denied by them. Excuse me. It is simply thrown into the trash. It is obvious that their commitment to block approaches, their desire to drive the world into a situation of constant confrontation between them and us, is a vicious legacy of the 20th century. This is a product of Western political culture, at least in its most aggressive manifestations. I will repeat that the West always needs an enemy. Well, for a certain part of the West, for a certain part of the Western elites, they need an enemy to fight against, which can explain the need for forceful action and expansion. That they also need an enemy to maintain internal control in a certain system of this same hegemon, within blocs, within NATO, or within other military political blocs. If there is an enemy, then everyone should rally around the boss. It is none of our business how other states live. Though we see how in many of them the ruling elites force societies to accept norms and rules that the citizens themselves, at least a large number of citizens, and in some countries, one can absolutely say, the majority of citizens, do not want to accept, that they force them, constantly inventing reasons for this, finding external culprits for growing internal problems, inventing and inflating non-existent threats. At the same time, Russia is a favorite topic of such politicians. Of course, we are already accustomed to this. We are historically accustomed to it, that they are trying to create the image of an enemy out of everyone who is not ready to blindly follow these Western elites. They make it out of anyone, from the People's Republic of China. In certain situations, at a certain moment, They also tried to make an enemy out of India. Of course, now they are flirting with it. We understand this very well. We feel and see the situation in Asia. This is all clear. The Indian leadership, I want to say, that it is independent. It is very nationally oriented. I think that these attempts of theirs make no sense. But, nevertheless, they continue. They are also trying to create an enemy from the Arab world. Also selectively, they try to act carefully, but, nevertheless, in general, this is what it all comes down to. And even from Muslims in general, they are trying to create some kind of hostile environment, and so on. In fact, anyone who behaves independently, who follows their own interests, instantly turns into an obstacle for these Western elites that they need to eliminate. They are imposing artificial geopolitical structures on the world. They create closed block formats. We see this in Europe, where they have been pursuing an impudent line on NATO expansion for decades, as well as in the Asia-Pacific region and South Asia, where they are trying to break an open and inclusive architecture of cooperation. The bloc approach, we will call a spade, is a restriction of the rights and freedoms of states to their own development, an attempt to drive them into a certain cage of obligations. This is to a certain extent. This is an obvious thing. This is a taking away of part of the sovereignty. And then, and very often, this is the imposition of decisions in other areas, in addition to the security sphere, and primarily in the economic sphere, as is now happening in relations between the United States and Europe. There is no need to explain this, but if this is necessary, then during the discussion, after my opening remarks, we will talk about this in more detail. To do this, they are trying to replace international law with some order. What order is this? This is an order based on certain rules. What are these rules? What kind are these rules? Who invented them? This is completely incomprehensible. This is just some bullshit. But they are trying to introduce this into the consciousness of millions of people. They say we have to live by the rules. By what rules? And in general, if you allow, our Western colleagues, especially from the United States, they not only arbitrarily set such rules, but they also teach us at the same time. They say who should follow these rules and how. In general, who should behave and how. All this is done and said by them, as a rule, in an openly boorish manner. This is still the same manifestation of colonial thinking. All the time we hear, all the time they say that we owe something, that we are obliged, that they are seriously warning us about something. Actually, who are you? What right do you have to warn someone? This is simply amazing. Maybe for those who say this, maybe it's time for you yourself to get rid of arrogance. Stop behaving in relation to the world community in such a way that it perfectly understands its tasks, its interests, and it's time to get rid of this thinking from the era of colonial rule. I want to tell them, wipe your eyes. This era is long over, and it will never come back. Never. I will say more. Over the centuries, such behavior led to the reproduction of the same thing, big wars, to justify which they came up with various ideological and sometimes pseudo-moral justifications. This is especially dangerous today. Humanity has means that, as we know, can easily destroy the entire planet. And manipulation of consciousness on an incredible scale leads to a loss of sense of reality. Of course, we need to get out of this vicious circle. We need to look for some way out. As I understand it, dear friends and colleagues, you are gathering at the Valdai site for this purpose, in the concept of Russian foreign policy, adopted this year. Our country is characterized as a distinctive state civilization. This formulation accurately and succinctly reflects how we understand not only our own development, It reflects the basic principles of the world order, for the victory of which we hope. In our understanding, civilization is a multifaceted phenomenon. Of course, many people interpret this phenomenon differently. There was also an openly colonial interpretation that supposedly there is a certain civilized world that serves as a model for others, and everyone must follow these standards, these models, and those who do not agree will be driven into the civilization with the baton of an enlightened master. As I just said, those days are over, and our understanding of civilization is completely different. Firstly, there are many civilizations, and none of them is better or worse than the other. They had equal rights as exponents of the aspiration of their cultures and traditions, their peoples. This is personal for each of us. For example, for me these are the aspiration of our people, my people, of which I was lucky enough to become a part. Outstanding thinkers around the world, adherents of the civilizational approach, have reflected and continue to reflect on the concept of civilization.
So what do you think? Isn't it time that most African countries started thinking about how they could develop and direct their countries in the ways that matters to them most, instead of always relying on some Western partners who don't have their African interests at heart? Anyway, you can leave your comments in the comment section below, and I will be back with the next broadcast. Good day.